Alright everybody, welcome to my stream. This is Deryck Keller. Tonight we're going to talk about mantises. So I'm taking a break from bees. I hope you all can hear me and everything. If you can't hear me, I guess let me know. So I recently finished a project for the Gnomon Workshop. And so I'm going to plug it. Creature modeling with ZBrush and Marmoset tool bag. So this is the Orchid Mantis, and in this video series, you guys want to check it out. Gnomon Workshop, it's brand new. I have something like 22 chapters. I go through the whole process of modeling this Orchid Mantis from scratch, all the way to poly painting and texturing in Marmoset tool bag, and then I actually rendered it in Marmoset tool bag. So these are some of the renders. If I can get this thing over here. So that's a render that didn't come out, but I mean, this is nice because it's pretty much real time. There is ray tracing in Marmoset, but you can get some really nice renders, and then I'm pretty confident I can get a similar look out of this into like Unreal or something like that. So Marmoset has some great texture tools, but we're not talking about Marmoset tonight. We are talking about ZBrush. And so let's hide this, and let's hide this. Let's go into ZBrush. And so what I wanted to do tonight is I have my Orchid Mantis here, and I brought in a flower. So this is a flower model I made a while back. It's like a sync foil that I used in another animation, and I'm using it as kind of a stand-in today, so that I have something that I can pose my Orchid Mantis on. And these guys, I mean, they tend to be pretty small. This is a juvenile female was the idea behind this, but I think it may be too small. So I'm going to take my flower folder, here, this one right here, and let's quickly just transpose the set down a little bit, because I think that's too small. I'm being indecisive. Whatever, either way. So what I want to do is I'm looking at some reference here, and this is my pure reference, and these are images I grabbed off online. So I'm trying to think of a good pose to do. I kind of like, I've already done sort of, the thing about these guys is they have the tendency to create this kind of adorable pose, like this kind of thing, which I think is awesome, but I've already done that pose. So I want to do something a little bit different, and I do like some of the poses where they're starting to outreach some of their arms here, and they tend to be standing on all kinds of random twigs and all that kind of stuff. But I'm going to use the flower, so I think I might do something kind of like this. There was another one in here, like I don't know if I want to do grabbing an insect. This looks like it has a springtail that it's eating for lunch, but yeah, it looks like part of a fly right there. I think I want to do something like that. So I'm just going to use the ZBrush tools to pose my mantis model. These things are freaking awesome, though. This one is super nice. I might have to do something like this at some point. I like this. They have a very goofy face. I mean, they really look like they're ready for anything. But they're also, they're very pretty and very elegant and a little bit cute, and at the same time absolutely terrifying. Because look at these appendages, man. I mean, that's just built for tearing things apart. So I'll show you the model real quick of the mantis. Let's focus in on the head here. So I have it arranged in a bunch of different folders over here. And this is the plants. Let's move this down here. And right now everything's at the lowest subdivision level. If I put everything at the highest subdivision level, let's take a look at what that looks like. I'll do all high. It's going to probably take a few months because it's a pretty complex model. Well, let's do that. Okay, so there we can see that it's a highest subdivision level. Okay. I'm not seeing much of anybody messaging, so type a message if you guys can hear me or something, so I know that I'm not talking to myself, although that's not that unusual. So the model, the whole scene right here is about 150 million polygons. I have a space mouse, maybe I should use it. So what I'm going to do, but you can see, you know, and this is all painted in ZBrush, and it's a lot of different subtools. That's kind of the way it looks right now, which I think is kind of cool. But of course, this is going to be too high res to pose, so let's do all low again. Bring this down low subdivision level. And since I have these organized in folders, I can use a transpose set feature to make the pose. So let's see. I think what I want to do is, let's move the flower. You know, I could use Transpose Master for this as well, but I kind of don't want to. I've used the rigging system with Z-spheres before, and that's pretty cool. But it takes a long time to get kind of the Z-spheres skinned correctly, and since this guy isn't really deforming, he's just like kind of like a robot. Sorry, this gal. I don't know if I need to do that. So I think what instead is I'll just transpose it by groups at a time, posing each part of the model. What's nice about this is that I can create the pose here in ZBrush and export everything as an FBX and bring it into Marmoset. I already have all the textures and in fact the entire scene set up to render in Marmoset, so then I could just bring the posed version in there. That might be kind of fun to work with. So, and then, you know, since I already had the textures and the Marmoset materials, I could do a nice render there. But eventually what I would like to do is one of the personal projects I'm working on right now, you know, is I've been working on creating animations of insects for many years now, just kind of exploring their physiology and stuff, and just the things that I'm interested in. So, but I've been using, you know, V-Ray, and now even back as far as Mental Ray and Octane and Redshift and all kinds of other rendering engines. And so I really want to try and migrate my entire workflow over to Unreal. So that's why I'm working with this kind of game level software like Marmoset. And what I'm working on right now is trying to come up with a nice scene, like a pond or something like that, that has kind of like a macro photography set up in Unreal. I'm going to see how realistic I can get it. So I think what I want to do eventually is have this scene with the pose rendered in, exported and rendered in Unreal. And if I can do some animation, I'll do that as well. So, taking a look at the posture here. The interesting things about these guys is they tend to, like, their legs splay out kind of like table legs in a lot of these poses. So not necessarily here, but definitely here, like here. I mean, it kind of had that already. It's not super dynamic because it's like, you know, it's like table legs, right? So I might want to move these around a little bit so that they're not so, a little bit more interesting. So let's start with, actually maybe I will start with the legs. Look at the rear legs. So that's this subtool right here. And let's expand this. What I might do, I think this is going to be too irritating if I do it by folders. So what I think I'm going to do is I am going to use Subtool Master. So maybe what I'll do is I think I'm going to change my mind here. Well, I can still do Subtool. Yeah, I'm going to take this folder and I'm going to get rid of it. I can always bring that in later. This is the flower. Okay. So what I'm going to do now is let's go ahead and use Subtool Master. So I'm going to go in here and Subtool Master, or sorry, Transpose Master. Let's do Transpose Master. I'm not going to do Z-Sphere Rig though. I'm just going to do straight up Transpose Master. So let's do T-Pose. There we go. And let's take a look at our polygroup. So preserve the polygroup, so that'll make our life a lot easier. So what I'm going to do here, I'm going to hide this, I'm going to hide this. Actually, no, I should do, let's do this. Okay, so just have the legs visible. Let's hide that. So you just have the legs visible. And I'm going to do auto groups. Different poly. That way I can do things sort of asymmetrically. Mask all this. So about, I don't know, half an hour ago, yeah, it was about a half an hour ago, I was sitting inside my house, watching TV, hanging out with my dogs, and I heard a sound that sounded kind of like, you know, the world blowing up. Went outside and several fighter jets flying over the house in Los Angeles, very, very low. So, yeah, that was kind of exciting. It's always good to hear something like that. We spent the whole day watching the news. So I'll have to change my underwear later. Because that was exciting. I used to work downtown when I worked at Otoy in downtown Los Angeles. And every once in a while, we'd have a fighter jet or military helicopter fly right next to the windows of the building, just soar right down the freaking street in between the buildings. It was terrifying, but it certainly woke you up. So I had a little bit of that today, so that's always good. It'd be nice if people would stop blowing each other up, so you know we can do things like ZBrush and stuff. That's much more fun. Oh my, what do I know? Nobody listens to me. I can't even tell if anybody's listening to me right now. I can tell you all are fascinated, though. So what I'm doing is I'm kind of moving one part at a time. I get this kind of old school kinematics, forward kinematics here, and just kind of editing these parts, masking everything else. I could also use mask by polygroup, but I think what I'm going to do now is just, whoops, Q for draw. Try and move these just a little bit. Let's lower the Z intensity on the move brush quite a bit so that we can kind of just do a nice little gradual nudge here. Smoothing is a great idea. Just want to get some symmetry into the legs here. And then for the abdomen, I'll worry about the abdomen later. Let's clear the mask. Oh, there goes some, that's a police helicopter, so that's just normal. It is weird that both the Orchid Mantis and the fighter jets would fly around, but I believe when I was working at Otoy downtown, it was mostly military exercises. So that was like 2000, I worked there from 2017 to 2018. So that was just military exercises. That's not that unusual though, it happens in LA, but today it was a little bit jarring just because I spent the whole day watching the news and then kind of made the news extremely real. But Orchid Mantises do fly around too. Eventually I will most definitely rig this model in like Maya or something and do some animations. I already have a nice, mantis rig that I used for another animation, so it's just a different species of mantis, so I could easily just reskin this one to that rig. Having a nice library of bugs and bug rigs is very helpful, because then I get a job where like a spider or something like that, and I already have a nice spider rig. What am I trying to do here? The main key is that when I create models for personal projects or other clients or whatever, I do my best to keep things extremely neat and organized so that sometime down the road, you never know when that model could come in really handy in a job, and then I've got most of the work done for me. And of course, you never want to tell the clients that. But, it makes things a lot easier. I mean, it's the same thing. We're having character models, obviously. It's not saying it's anything that's new, but still, it's if you have things organized on your hard drive and organized in terms of the scenes and names of the objects and stuff, it makes things a lot easier. So I'm kind of imagining an invisible flower here. I wanted to put one leg kind of down like this to break up the symmetry and make it more interesting, and kind of imitating this right here. So I want to break up the symmetry of the front legs now. Okay, so these are still symmetrical in terms of polygroups. So we do this. Seriously. Okay. I'm being an idiot. There we go. Let's do auto groups. There we go. Every once in a while the brain actually kicks in and does something useful. You know, the human brain is the most important organ in the human body, according to the human brain. You don't hear any other organs in the human body speaking up, saying that they're the most important ones, so clearly it must be the brain, right? Yeah, I think my liver disagrees with that. Okay. Let's do this. Actually, let's do this. I'm going to have the back leg down. I think I'm going to have the front leg up a little bit. Main thing is to try and not have the leg detached from the body. And if that leg is in, let's put this, whoops, focal shift on that. There we go. This is one of those things where when they first introduced this little jobby up here, I was like not impressed at all, and now I can't live without it. It's like the greatest thing in the world, because I'm really trying to focus on the silhouette. I don't want to have a totally perfect X, because that's a little bit boring. So I'm trying to create just a little bit of juxtaposition there. So I'm kind of liking that. So it's not a perfect X. And then this one, I might come back to the legs and instead work a little bit on some of the other parts. So I like the way that in this one the mantis is, okay, so the head's at a tilt, sitting a little bit more upright, and the legs are out, so it looks a little bit more alert. So I don't have to do a whole lot of work on the on the abdomen. Let's do this. Mask everything there, and then to move the legs again, of course. That's okay. This is the kind of thing where, you know, when I was modeling this, I'm looking all over for like reference of this particular species from that view. Not something you're going to find on the internet too easily. I'll fix the legs a little bit later. Okay, so let's take the head here. And I'm just going to hide everything else. Get the mask. Maybe for the gizmo, and then these things have really wild necks. There's like kind of crazy detail on them, and their ear is actually right in the middle of their thorax. So they actually do hear. They're also one of the few insects that have, you know, a lot of insects, of course, have compound eyes. They have two compound eyes. Many, but not all do. But the mantis is one of the only ones that they've shown that has true stereoscopic vision. So it can actually triangulate the position of prey using its eyes. Now with the orchid mantis, I have no idea what these structures, these are called the ocular spine, if they give the orchid mantis any type of actual advantage over, say, a regular mantis. So I don't know why they're there other than possibly they aid in camouflage, but there's a lot of stuff we don't know about mantises because it's not like there's big mantis money right now, you know. There are a few researchers that are focusing on mantises because they're fascinating. I mean, there's so much things you learn about them. I mean, if you're one of those people that feels that we should, you know, be fairly utilitarian in our discoveries, scientific discoveries, that's fine. There's plenty of engineering things that you can get from studying insects. I know that I did a little project a while back on dragonfly wings, and what's really cool about dragonfly wings is each one of those little cells, it's like a little bubble, and it's kind of like stained glass, but there's a little bit of a space in there, and each one of those tiny little pieces of stained glass in a dragonfly wing. And what happens is when the dragonfly wings flap, and they flap very fast rate, they create vortices in those little spaces. And those vortices of air that spin around very quickly act like ball bearings. So the dragonfly is rolling through the air on these ball bearings. And that's why it's able to be so incredibly acrobatic. It's kind of one of the oldest flying insects that we know of. I think Meganura was the ancient dragonfly. But what's really cool about this is, you know, it allows them to do things like turn 180 degrees within like 3 or 4 wing flaps. Ah, yes. And the topology on this particular mantis is all ZRemesher. I did it all using ZRemesher with polygroups. And I used to do a lot of hand retopology, drinking a beer, yeah. Hand retopology in Maya and stuff like that. I am definitely conscious of trying to do good topology. I mean, this one, there's obviously more on the head than the rest of it. So ZRemesher as an instant topology tool was a hard sell for me. It took me a long time and for them to come up with several versions before I finally embraced it, which I do now. But it's really just using that use polygroups feature. You can start to easily get ZRemesher to behave exactly the way you want it to, or pretty darn close anyways, for something like this. If you were you know, the thing about insects is I'm cheating because there are all these different parts, right? So if you rig them, it's just like a robot. I'm rigging the whole head, the eyes to the same joint. I'm rigging the whole thorax to the same joint. There's no deformations like a human face, which is going all over the place. So if I was doing a human character, you can't be this loosey-goosey with the topology. You really have to have, if it's meant for animation, that is, you really have to have a strong topology. But for me, when I'm doing insects and all, it's wonderful because I kind of hate joint weighting. So ZBrush does a fine job, I think. It could always be improved, obviously, but I think for this project, since I did this project as a tutorial, and I didn't want to go into, I wanted to keep it as much in ZBrush as possible. I kind of left the retopology. Let ZBrush do a lot of the work. Let's probably go with that. Actually. Well, I've been using ZBrush since about 2004. And I also have written several books on it and done several tutorials for Pixelogic, lynda.com, the Newman Workshop, and I taught it for 10 years I taught Intro to ZBrush and Creature Modeling over at the Newman School. So I can't tell you how long it took me to become effective ZBrush artist, but I can tell you after all of that, I feel confident that I can pretty much do whatever I put my mind to in ZBrush, which is a very nice feeling. There's always new tools that I need to learn, and there's always techniques or some little trick that I could perfect, obviously, or learn from other ZBrush artists, which I do. But at the same time, I would say, from my experience of teaching ZBrush at the Newman School, I did 10-week classes, and it was 3 hours a week for 10 weeks. So I got to see students, and I taught students who were traditional sculptors, who had a lot of experience with other CG or no experience with the computer. So I think, generally speaking, if you practice, if you're starting just from the very beginning and you practice and you watch a lot of tutorials, you can gain confidence in ZBrush in probably 10 or 12 weeks if you do it every day. The key to anything, to practicing any kind of art form, whether it's music, painting, drawing, whatever, is it's better to do a little bit every day than trying to cram in a whole bunch like once a week, because all you're really doing is you're teaching your brain stuff. As I mentioned before, your brain thinks it's very smart, but you have to learn how to teach your brain stuff, and that requires repetition. You got to reinforce the connections between neurons so that the brain can actually have time to absorb and process the information. So that's why it's always better, it would be better to do 20 minutes a day, for a month, than it would be to do a few hours once or twice a month. Or even if you did, 8 hours in one day, because it's kind of like the law of diminishing returns, So that's my advice on that, from my observations of teaching students and that kind of thing. I think 10 to 12 weeks if you really put your mind to it. There's a lot of tools in ZBrush, but you don't have to master them all. You only have to master a few at a time and then slowly build out from there. You know what I mean? It's like you don't want to necessarily try to learn everything or master everything, because there's tools in ZBrush that I don't use very often, and I know other people don't use because of the type of work that I do. And so I would say, in my opinion, in learning ZBrush, aside from figuring out the interface, which does take some time because it's a weird interface, mastering polygroups is one of the most important things to get in ZBrush. Aside from learning how to deal with geometry and levels of subdivision and the sculpting brushes and all that kind of stuff. The sooner you wrap your head around how all the different ways you can use polygroups, the better off you'll be, because it's what I'm using right now. I'm using polygroups as a way to mask off different areas so that I can pose this gal. And I also use polygroups a lot for helping ZRemesher do a better job of retopology, obviously creating masks, obviously I do a lot of my UV work, at least my initial UV work, in ZBrush now. I mean, I still do it in Maya as well, but if you use UV Master and you have some nice topology and some decent polygroup setup, you can create some pretty sweet UV shells without a whole lot of work, or at least get a nice start on your UVing. And that's helpful if you use polygroups. Yeah, the interesting thing about insects is that they're perfect, and this is what I discovered a few years ago, like 10 or 12 years ago when I first started getting into them. I really had an epiphany one night because I really like doing organic modeling, but I also like doing hard surface robot stuff. And insects are the perfect in between. Any kind of arachnid or arthropod or crustacean or insect is the perfect in between. It's the best of both worlds. You get some really, I mean, these are some really cool shapes. If I just go back to my original model here, you know, and take a look at this. I mean, look at how insanely utilitarian this shape is. The way that, you know, this is what it's using to capture its prey. This is its teeth right here. You know, the mouth parts are just fiddly little appendages, you know what I mean? But this is the business end. And you can see how it's just, you know, one side just fits perfectly into the other. And there we go, finally. How efficient this is. And, you know, the shape here is it's terrifying. These things are just total monsters. I mean, I love this little one extra spike here that's just kind of like the FU spike, you know, it's like you're dead now. And at the same time, it also has to accommodate, you know, there's so many things that the design of this insect has to accommodate. I'm talking about design in terms of bottom-up design, not top-down design. So it has to not only disguise itself from potential predators, it also has to disguise itself from potential prey, but it also has to make itself noticeable to potential mates. All these things at the same time. And so there's a scientific paper that, and there's a lot of discussion, you know, it's called an Orchid Mantis because the first guy who ever saw one of these in the 19th century saw it hiding out in an Orchid Mantis, in an orchid. But in reality, it's now thought that they kind of imitate not just orchids, but kind of just flowers in general as a way to kind of confuse both prey and predators. This is kind of interesting. It just looks like just general flower stuff. But I always like on these giant weird lobes right here that looks just like flower petals. I mean, that's just an extension of the chitin, and you guys are probably familiar with other mantises. They don't necessarily have that structure. So it's something that's kind of unique to this type of mantis. Yeah, I mean, it's interesting, you know, we talk about purpose, you know, I mean, obviously there's a temptation to, we tend to, I know a lot of scientists tend to start to anthropomorphize when they talk about these things, and they say, oh, well, you know, the mantis is trying to look like an orchid. Well, the mantis isn't trying to do anything but, like, you know, eat, not die, and mate. So it doesn't have a conscious decision to necessarily look like a flower, although these mantises do have the ability to change their color very slowly, like some spiders and some mollusks and stuff. But at the same time, it's like you're not actually sitting around thinking about what your liver is doing right now. Your liver is just doing what it does. And it's not like anybody sat down at a meeting and saying, okay, we need some kind of organ that's going to filter the blood. How about we have a liver do it? This is something that is just, I know I'm going to get into trouble for saying the E word, but it's true, or at least most of the evidence supports the idea that this is how they evolved. But it's not. That's why I say it's a bottom-up design, not a top-down design. So it's like there's a teleological tendency to assume that there's a purpose to every structure, and there kind of is, but I always like to term it, instead of saying purpose, I like to say advantage. So it's kind of quibbling over words, but that's just where I'm coming from. So let's see. Keep this. Again, I kind of want to have it asymmetrical. Again, like that. Checking out perspective view. Like when I'm at this point in the process, I am trying to sort of think of like what could be a cool camera angle. And I think the head might be a little bit too tilted. Turn on double-sided. Yes, I think that's a good way to put it. Whatever keeps you alive and gets you laid. My brain stopped working. All right, come on. Thank you. There we go. This is why I need to eventually rig this thing in Maya, because with the rig it's so much faster. I kind of like that because there's a little bit more of a counterpoint to it, that pose, I think. Unless I just ended up with the exact same thing that I had before, which is always possible. In which case, I know I made the right decision. It's really cool when you're talking about mimicry it's interesting to see how many insects are mimics of ants and arthropods. I've seen jumping spiders that look like ants and beetles that look like ants walking backwards. There's a lot of ant mimics, but there's not a lot of ants that mimic other insects. And the reason, as far as we can tell, is because ants are badasses. And people don't give them enough credit for being as badass as they are, but they really are. They're definitely, most of the small critters in the world fear ants. They don't like them because ants are a super organism and they work together and they can tear apart just about anything. Yeah, as I mentioned before, it would be easier to rig this in Maya, and I have created rigs for a similar mantis in Maya, but I'm doing a ZBrush live stream, so I want to work in ZBrush. So that's why I'm doing it here. But yeah, I usually end up rigging my insects and using the rigs for other projects. But for the Gnomon workshop, I wanted to keep it mostly ZBrush and a little bit of Marmoset. And I think it's good to sort of show how you can pose things in ZBrush for doing like, still composition or something like that. But yeah, I do tend up to actually, I mean, my favorite thing is to actually bring this always to the point where I can actually create animations, because that's my eventual goal. But yeah, for tonight I'm just doing a little fun pose, playing with the model and seeing what I can come up with. I mean, it might also be easier to rig this using Z-spheres, if I'm using the Z-sphere rig here, but I didn't want to spend the whole evening trying to adjust the Z-spheres in such a way so that they weren't squishing around the model too much. Also, after this, once I get the general pose, I could set this back to my original model and then go back and tweak things like the antenna and stuff. Yes. Okay. So references, which is something I do like to talk about a lot. So the first place I go, just like everybody else, is, the internet, which usually is a miserable failure, because if you do Google image searches, half the time the images are tagged wrong. So what they're labeled, I've seen it, people label a fly, label a bee what's actually a fly and all that kind of stuff. So for orchid mantises, they're largely in Asia. So I relied on books, photographers by photographers I like, macro photographers, Peter Nesgrecki, Alex Wilde, Nikki Bay, John and Kendra Abbott, all these people that I think for me are like the superstars of macro world. So I have their books, or I follow them on Instagram, follow them, check out their stuff. But I also go out into the field with the camera. I'm not a great photographer at all, but I really enjoy it. And I take macro photography workshops. So I've taken classes with people like Nikki Bay, Thomas Shahan, and all those guys. And I've gone as far as I did a trip in 2018. We actually went all the way to Mozambique, to Gorongosa Park in Mozambique, which was really, really freaking amazing. And I got to spend 10 days like in the field taking pictures with these guys, these stars of the insect macro world. And there's nothing like actually being in the field and taking the pictures, because then you're actually connected with them, with the insect, with the subject matter, in a really interesting way. And of course, there's also, we do like lectures, or they do lectures, and they talk about entomology and stuff, which I love that stuff. The other thing is I make friends with people at the Natural History Museum. So here in LA, I know Brian Brown at the Natural History Museum and Lisa Gonzalez. So I've actually gone there, and they've taken me in their insect collection and even given me a few samples of stuff they could spare, obviously. So I have a little collection of dead bugs, which my wife is really excited about, on my shelves in my little studio. And I had a little, not a super expensive microscope, but a decent one, a little light box, so I can go in and take pictures of them, of dead bugs. And that's really helpful, because you can cut them up and look at them under a microscope. But then again, you're limited to what you can actually find. There's some websites online where you can buy samples of bugs, whether they're suitable for framing, and I have a few on my wall, and or I just have them in disgusting little boxes and I keep on my shelves, and every once in a while, if I need to do something specific, I might have one. So I'll go to bug fairs and stuff like that. But you gotta go to the bugs. The internet alone is okay for a quick, and it depends. The nice thing about an orchid mantis is they're so pretty that there's loads and loads of pictures of them. But I did have to do a job for a museum a couple years ago, a museum in Australia. I don't even know if the exhibit opened, but I ended up having to model probably 50 or so extremely obscure arthropods. Some of these things live in caves, and only a single cave in Australia. And so there's no reference online. And there's literally would like look up the organism that I was supposed to model, and Google would say there's like 0 references for this. And so I had to rely on the pictures and diagrams, and in some cases 3D scans that they gave me to model these things, or sometimes getting diagrams from scientists, which is always fun because a scientist might know a lot about their bug, but they know nothing about communicating visually. So you get this weird chicken scratch on a napkin or something, and it's just like 8 lines. You're like, I can't model that, man. You need to be more specific. So that was a really challenging project. I don't know if the exhibit ever opened. It was a lot of fun. They 3D printed a lot of my models. It was a very tough job, but it was a lot of fun, and I learned a lot about working with 3D data, and they actually printed out the models too. I didn't do the printing. Another company, CDM, did that project. Do I know any databases for physical references of bugs that can be used for sculpting? Actually, okay, so the first place I would go to, oh crap, I can't remember the name of it now. Well, there's the Encyclopedia of Life, which is a website, but they're mildly better than Wikipedia. But what is the website with the, you can post 3D models on that everybody goes to, not Turbo Squid. You guys know what I'm talking about. Brain is having a fart here. Why can't I find this stupid website? I mean, some of these 3D model websites, such as Turbo Squid, most of their models are crap. Sketchfab, there we go. Okay. Sorry, my brain stopped there. Okay, if you go to Sketchfab, there's a lot of garbage on here, but there's also some good stuff. And you can find, there are a couple labs that have uploaded insect scans, and a lot of them are free. So this is a great place, or at least very cheap. All right, abstract insect, we don't need that. But there's some really cool scan data. So, I mean, these look really nice at first. Of course, you download it, and the topology is just garbage, and the textures are really low res, but it is a good starting place. So that is like one of the best places to get 3D models to start with, especially if you want to practice and get something. So I recommend Sketchfab as a good place to start. In terms of an online database, there are people who are building it. There's some, there's Ant Library. What's it called? There's a few ant base. I mean, it's largely ants, and the problem with these websites is that where they're organized, it's hard to find decent visual stuff. But looking around long enough, you will definitely find some. It depends on the bug, because it's like, again, everything is economically driven. So ants and termites tend to have a lot of databases because they affect human beings economically very strongly, whether it's whether it's through agriculture or your home or that kind of stuff. So let me take a look at that. Neurological news. In any case, Wasp Web, that's kind of cool. I haven't seen this one before. So that's kind of nice. So yeah, you can find a website like this, and they have like a media gallery. So lots of cool pictures of wasps. So this is kind of nice because they have multiple views. So I would check those out. E.O. Wilson, famous scientist, has the Encyclopedia of Life. EOL.org. And this has a lot of databases of lots of different both insects and arachnids and arthropods and invertebrates. So this is a good one to find some good knowledge. Like I say, I would say this is like a step above Wikipedia, but it's not complete by any means. But that's something you can check out. So this model I created, and you just walked right into my opportunity to plug the Gnomon Workshop video series. I created this model specifically for creature modeling with ZBrush Gnomon Workshop. Like I said before, it's 20 videos. It does come with a project file, so you can download the model and check it out. And I uploaded a lot, probably way too much. So I have the model at various different stages that you can check out. So that's basically why I created this particular model, because I was talking to them, and we were trying to think. I needed to update my old insect modeling tutorial series because it had gotten kind of out of date, and they suggested I do a mantis this time, which I thought that's great because I'd already done Stagmomantis lambata. So I thought, I know they wanted something badass and scary, but I'm like, I want to do something pretty. It's still badass and scary, but pretty at the same time. So that's the kind of creature I like. This is something that, okay, so I have a little pet peeve with creature design. I always see creature design tends to be very one note. I see a lot of people doing something either really cute and adorable or really scary. And I rarely see somebody trying to come up with the perfect blend of beautiful and terrifying at the same time. And nature does that all the freaking time. So that's like one of nature's oldest tricks in the book. So I think, for creature modeling, next time you set out to design an alien or a creature or whatever, see what you can do to give it more than just a single dimension in terms of character. See what you can do to combine, both something that is absolutely beautiful. I mean, this one is kind of a gimme because it's like, okay, well, it's imitating a pretty flower. But, the flower and the mantis have a relationship with each other. What's really cool is I'm also working on modeling an orchid bee. That's another one of the projects that I'm working on right now that I've done in the past few live streams. I decided to take a break for it tonight. So I don't know why I'm doing so many orchid related insects, but it is quite fascinating because the orchid itself is a very tricky organism. For the there's a wasp. There's an orchid that smells exactly or produces a chemical very similar to a pheromone that the female wasp of this species puts out. And it's so strong that the male wasp will go straight for that flower, pass right by the females, and the actual orchid flower itself resembles the female of the wasp, the female of the species. So on many levels, that flower is working very hard to fool the insect so that it can be pollinated by it, which I think is really fascinating. So, you have orchid wasps and bees and mantises, and they're all hanging out by this flower. And it's quite a scene, man. It's like Sammy Davis Jr. would say. Okay, so let's say that we have this as our pose. I think that might be okay for now. We'll see. I'm gonna make the flower fit to the pose, I think. So let's go in here and go to Z plugin and do T-pose to sub T so we can get this back to our mantis model. See how well this works with folders and stuff. I don't know if I've done this in a while on a model this complicated. So far, this looks like it's pretty good, doing a pretty good job. There we go. Not bad. I'm going to tighten things up a little bit, but Works. So now what I can do is I can go to my folder, and this is my flower. This is a sync foil, which I used for another animation altogether. I use Megascans quite a bit. The only problem is that their flowers rarely look good close up, so I almost always have to either up-res their models or create my own model. But in this case, I wanted this specific flower and they didn't have it, so I modeled it. But I do love Megascans very much. It's one of my favorite. You know, the revolution that's going on right now in the world of 3D is quite interesting, because I wonder sometimes if the rest of the world understands what we're kind of coming to grips with, which is if you have tools like Unreal and Unity and Blender and all these other immediately accessible tools, and then something like Megascans, which is for the most part free. I mean, that's the future of whatever metaverse horrible concoction they come up with is going to be. So we're actually, you know, it's just a fascinating time to be a 3D modeler. It's very different from when I started. I started doing this stuff in 1998, and I hate to sound like that guy, but I am that guy. So see it transform over the decades into something that's, you know, not just mainstream, but contributing to like building this kind of weird virtual future. It's quite astounding. Okay, so I'm going to go to Subtool Master, and I'm going to copy this folder, and I'm going to go back to my posed model, and I'm going to paste. Whoops, need to go to the plugin again. Paste folder. Paste folder. There we go. So I'm pasting this back in. And now what I'm going to do is take that folder and let's do a transpose set. And let's make sure our overshift shift is at -100. This is one of my favorite new features of ZBrush, is the fall off for the transpose, because it's just, you know, because I have a pretty boring flower here. So what I can do now, make it a little bigger. I don't know, these things are pretty small, the mantises are. So thinking in terms of like silhouette, rather than having this flat here, I mean, it could sort of have it at an angle where the mantis is stepping like on this right here. So in that case, my composition would largely be like just a straight up angle like this. Or maybe I could do something where it's kind of like this. You know what I mean? So now I have blanc and blanc as my composition. I kind of like that. I mean, I don't know if I like this. Although this is kind of nice because now it looks like a giant. Both the flower and the mantis are creating this kind of open jaw kind of composition. That's kind of interesting. Let's try that. My website is bloopatone.com, and check out my portfolio. You'll see there's a lot of bugs, and I'm doing bug related jewelry too. So, and some non-bug stuff, but feel free to check it out. I am obsessed with all things invertebrate, and if it's not invertebrate, then I really love reptiles, and if it's not a reptile, then I'm really into birds. If it's not a bird, then it's, I don't know. The only animal I'm not really crazy about is Homo sapiens. Because I'm a snob. Yeah, so this fall off feature is great because now I can use this almost like a deformer. You know, and it's great for creating like twists. So, and you can just adjust the strength of the deformation literally by how far away you put the gizmo from the surface. And it works also when transpose set mode. So it's one of the best new features because now I don't have to necessarily use a deformer to get this or sculpting brushes. I can block this out and then quickly fix it or tighten it up afterwards. I kind of like that. Of course, now that completely screws up my pose though, because now the legs aren't on anything. Okay, so that means we're not going to do that. Instead, I'm going to go over here. And yeah, I worked so hard to pose those legs, and then I just defeated the purpose of doing it. So let's try something more like this. That might be kind of cool if I wanted to do something like, yeah, that kind of works. So I might have to move that leg. Or I could also move the petals around too. Yeah, maybe what I'll do is something like this, and then I can just readjust the legs, like this leg, and just move that down a little bit. Move this petal over a little bit. Let's turn this off. Alt click on this. I like dogs. Dogs are actually my favorite animal because I live with 3 of them and they constantly crack me up. Let's do auto groups. Take move topological. The nice thing about, going out in the field and doing macro photography is also a great way to practice composition, I think, because of digital photography makes it so cheap to, I don't think I could ever handle being a photographer back in the old days of film because it'd be so expensive, because you really had to sit there and take 100 pictures. You have to take 50 more pictures than you think you took in order to get 1 or 2 good shots. I noticed that from all the photographers that I've hung out with, you know, basically it's fun because you'll get into a workshop and you go out into the field with these guys and their goofy camera rigs, guys and gals, and somebody will find something like a really cool spider or a mantis or something like that, you know, maybe something slightly rare. And so they'll be like, oh yeah, I found something really cool. And so everybody will come around with their camera and kind of hover around and take turns trying to get a decent picture of this critter. And I noticed that all the photographers that whose work I admire will take 100 more pictures than the rest of us who are more like beginners. Like they'll just sit there and just take one picture after another, after another, after another, after another, and they don't stop. To the point where you're kind of like, hey dude, it's time for, you know, give somebody else a chance. But it's just because they have the experience, and then you go and you take a look at the picture that you took of that bug, and you take a look at the picture they took of the exact same bug in the exact same location, and it's because they have that patience and that determination to just take so many pictures. Of course, it means that they're going to spend hours filtering through everything on their camera. They're usually pretty good at that, as opposed to me. But I remember watching two of these guys who I really admire. I'm going to drop some names. I apologize, but you know, it's Hollywood. And so it was Nikki Bay and Thomas Shahan, and they had found this giant jumping spider. It was a giant, relatively speaking. That means it's about the size of a quarter. And I think it was a Phidippus audax or something like that. Really beautiful spider. And they found it on the side of the road, and they were trying to get a perfect video, slow motion video on the iPhone of it jumping towards the phone. And I watched them take one video after another for about half an hour, and I finally was like, okay, I've had enough of this. And I wandered off. There was an outdoor bar where a bunch of us were hanging out and having some beers, taking a break from the workshop, and we could see them on the other side of the field, and they were at it for another 2 hours just trying to get the perfect picture. It was really, really funny, but they're really dedicated. I'm happy. My pictures of I like them. That's good enough for me. I'm not trying to win any competitions or anything, but it is a great reference. It's almost like practice is important or something. I'm going to save this real quick. I'm going to show a couple other websites since you guys are asking about reference. Nikki Bay. This guy's awesome. He's got a really great website. He's got massive libraries, interesting posts that go over the biology of these things, photography tips and tricks, and he sells equipment. I mean, he's got thousands of pictures of plant hoppers here. This guy's website is really amazing. So, and then he's got links to his Flickr site. So I would say Nikki Bay, put that on the top of your list if you're interested in getting insect reference. Then Thomas Shahan. This guy is a spider expert. And what's interesting about him, I think I mentioned this before, so hopefully I'm not boring anybody out there. He gets these amazing pictures, and he's had his pictures in National Geographic and stuff. In fact, if you've seen a picture of a jumping spider, there's a good chance you've seen one of his pictures. But he takes a lot of his pictures with equipment he finds in garage sales, or at least he did for a long time. I think he's finally upgraded his equipment. But he has some really cool videos, and he also does amazing art, like just astonishingly beautiful art. One of my favorite artists. And of course he's a musician, and of course he's really young, which is irritating, but he's a super nice guy and very knowledgeable about spiders. So I recommend him for reference and inspiration. And then Peter Neskreki is one of my favorites. Hopefully it loads. All right. Well, he takes a lot of pictures of polar bears eating marshmallows in the snow, so they come out kind of white. Here we go on Smug Bug. He also is he's a scientist. They're all these guys are actually scientists. He specializes in katydids. There's a nice orchid picture. There's a nice mantis right there. But he takes pictures of all kinds of other stuff. But he also specializes in bats. And there's a cool mantis. I gotta model one of those. So I highly recommend his work. And he has books, a lot of, like The Smaller Majority is a great book worth checking out. So those are some of my favorite photographers, and a lot of times when I do renders, I'm trying to emulate a lot of this kind of work. I haven't quite mastered it yet, but every time it gets a little bit better. But one of the things I like about Peter Nesgrecki is he combines using wide-angle lenses with macro at the same time. So you get, more of the background actually still in focus while still being able to see the subject up close. So he's got some great stuff that I highly recommend. Of course, his katydid work is really phenomenal too. And then the other one I would recommend is Alex Wilde. He specializes in ants and wasps. So, and he's also an ant scientist. You get some great pictures of spiders too. So, yeah, all these guys are great. Check out their work. But, I do, when I actually get to hang out with some of these guys, it's funny because one of them was like, well, you're making all these photorealistic insects. It's like, you're going to put us out of a job. I'm like, you guys can take 10,000 pictures in the time it takes me to make one model. So I wouldn't worry too much. I always joke that I'm going to try and model all the species of beetles. There's some 400,000 known species of beetles, so it's unlikely that I'm going to achieve that goal anytime soon. Okay, so let's go up here. So these are the polygroups that I initially had set up, so I'm going to get rid of them so that I can so I'm going to do this. Let's transpose this set. I have a space mouse. Why am I not using it? Okay. So we can go with that, and then we can do this. Oops. There we go. So yeah, that transpose set feature, the fact that it works with masks so well, is really nice. Because I mean, that was a really clumsy way to solve the problem, but in a pinch, it worked okay. So I just masked off one leg. So I had these subtools are set up for sculpting, not necessarily for posing. That's why I was using Transpose Master before. But I think I left Transpose Master a little bit too early. So now I have to use this clunky method of posing, but it's okay, it works, you know. Gets the job done. It's not bad. I think this pedal is too close to this leg. It's putting me off. So I'm just going to scooch it. What I need to do is make a decent orchid model, because that would help me with both my Orchid Bee and my Orchid Mantis. This would be kind of cool as a render right there. So one of the things that I've learned from macro photographers is really good when you're trying to do with composition, and you could apply this to aliens as well. It doesn't have to be just, you know, realistic bugs. But, you know, there's a tendency when you go out into the field and take pictures of bugs, since we tend to, at least ones like these, we tend to stand above them, to take a picture from here, this angle. But you always want to try and take a picture from an eye level or below of the bug, because that instantly puts you in their world. And that's something you can definitely see in the work of these guys. Almost all the time, almost all their pictures are at least eye level or below. These are some good examples right here. So whenever I'm trying to set up, I mean, this is a perfect example right there. I mean, this coconut crab right here, this is the perfect view. If it's from above, it's not nearly as interesting, but now it makes you feel like you have a connection with the subject. You know, obviously there are some exceptions like this one, but there's so much else going on in this picture that's cool that it's not a big deal. But this is a great example of this Katie did right here. I mean, the fact that we're below its eye line right there is making it, we're in its world. And so when I'm setting up a composition in ZBrush or Maya or whatever I'm trying to do it in, my ZBrush just stopped. Sorry, every once in a while I have a situation where my ZBrush will not maximize. Alright, we're almost done here today anyways. Come on. so I think I'm going to wrap it up for tonight since my machine has decided it no longer wants to maximize ZBrush. So I hope you guys enjoyed this kind of mellow, relaxing look into the world of Orchid Mantises. And I'll be back in a couple weeks. Here's a good example of what I was talking about. This is a render I did in Marmoset, so trying to really keep it low. By the way, these are the pseudo pupils, which I kind of drew on afterwards, because these two dots will follow you everywhere you go because they're kind of an optical illusion. They're not real pupils. It doesn't have eyes like we do. That's one of the things that give the mantises its charm, though. I think this one, I mean, these look pretty cool. They're not quite photoreal yet. They still look a little bit, well, that's a problem, obviously. They need a little bit more work, but since this is rendered in Marmoset, I found one last bit of advice I would like to give, is that all insects to some degree, insects and arthropods, are hairy. It just might be with like a mantis or other insects. It's hard to sort of see the hair at first because it could be so fine or sparse. Other insects, it's obviously very obvious. But even just putting a little bit of hair on an insect, even if it's just sparse here and there, pumps up the realism by like 200%. Especially if you combine it with depth of field. So if I had some blurred out hairs coming out, as long as they're in the appropriate places, that would help to make this look even more realistic, I think. It needs a little bit more work on the textures to make them look a little bit more schmutzy, but I do like how this came out. I think this really looks like nice flower petals there. That was the other thing. For this model, I made the abdomen separate pieces, which helps not only in terms of, rigging it so it bends properly, but it looks so much more realistic if each part of the abdomen is an overlapping separate piece. That's a big part of it. So I'll do one last plug. If you're a member of the Gnomon Workshop, or if you're thinking about it, check it out. Watch this video. I go all the way from, let's take off the sound here. But I go all the way through my process. Let me see, from Z-spheres all the way to the finished model. And I show all the techniques that I use along the way. So you guys should check that out. And then I even talk about, I think my favorite part of this particular video is, I do a lot of sort of comparing with my own reference photography. Like, so these are my own pictures. I get pretty detailed with the various parts of it, the mouth parts and everything. The wings, this is a juvenile, so the wings are very small. Of course, how I managed to figure out how to get a decent look on the legs, and then of course the ommatidia, the eyes, and then my favorite part of this actually was a poly painting because it's something that I really enjoy doing. So I talk a lot about painting it in ZBrush, and then the last 3 or 4 chapters I talk about Marmoset, bringing the model into Marmoset, painting textures, using the poly paint that I created, of course a lot of what I did tonight, kind of posing kind of thing, and then the final render. So and if you haven't checked out Marmoset 4, it's really cool. I've kind of made the switch over to Marmoset from Substance. I still like Substance as a great program and everything, but it's Adobe, and I want to support a nice small company, and I always like trying new tools. So check that out. And then next time I will see you in a couple weeks, and we'll do some other fun buggy or maybe a spider or something like that. And I hope you enjoyed this, and see you next time.